You're listening to Community Forum on KCCC 930 AM, sponsored by Eddy County, honoring God, country, and family, thriving with industry since 1889. Thank you for listening to Community Forum. My name is Johnny Chandler, the host of Community Forum and the owner of KCCC 930 AM. Today, my guest is Paul Gessing. Paul Gessing is the president of the Rio Grande Foundation, and I'm proud to have him on today. Paul, how are you doing?
Hey, doing really well. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, excellent. So I know about the Rio Grande Foundation a little bit through my work in television news in Albuquerque for almost 16 years. I'm a little bit familiar with your organization. I'm not sure a ton of people in the Carlsbad and Southeast New Mexico community, they may or may not be. Not a lot of media in the state of New Mexico actually hits down here at all. They rarely report down here, and if they do, it's going to be something extremely negative. Right. Only if something very negative happens are they going to report down here.
Right.
And they definitely don't really speak to Southeast New Mexico. The largest newspaper in the state doesn't even deliver to Southeast New Mexico. Right. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to introduce our listeners to you, to the Rio Grande Foundation. And I also wanted to introduce our listeners to everything that you guys have to offer, a way that they can get involved, the way that they can hear your message, and just basically what you do and how you do it for them in the community. I know you have a legislative scorecard on your website. I know you're very active in Santa Fe, and this community certainly feels like they're neglected by Santa Fe, unforgotten. You know what I mean? Unforgotten. How about forgotten? Right? They're forgotten, and they certainly they're just not spoken to down here. And we're an entire state. We're not just one city or two cities up north. So go ahead and just tell us a little bit about your organization.
Yeah, well, the Rio Grande Foundation is a nonprofit, nonpartisan, what we call a economic policy think tank. And a think tank is a fancy way of saying we research and analyze public policies here in New Mexico, predominantly at the state level, also at the local level. Carlsbad, not as much, but partially because we're of the free market, limited government persuasion, and folks in Carlsbad and Southeast New Mexico tend to get that kind of idea pretty well. It's Albuquerque, Santa Fe, maybe Las Cruces that we have a lot more issues crop up with, a lot bigger governments, a lot more to the left. So, when it comes to New Mexico as a state, we try to encourage the public and policymakers to consider ideas that are at work in other states along the lines of the economy, the education system, and other policies that will lead us to greater prosperity and greater freedom.
Excellent. So how long has the Rio Grande Foundation, how long have you been operating?
You mentioned 16 years. It's been 16 years for me at the
Wow.
Rio Grande Foundation. I started in March of 2006. So I've been at it for a while. It's a very fulfilling job in the sense that I enjoy what I do, and I enjoy talking about these issues to folks like yourself and others. It's a frustrating job in the sense that all we get out of Santa Fe, and I think most people within earshot of your station will agree with me. What we get out of Santa Fe is bad policy, interventions in your day-to-day life, and things that ultimately make us poor as a state, less educated, and ultimately a state that's kind of stagnant, despite the largesse coming out of the oil and gas industry and, again, Permian Basin, Southeast New Mexico.
Yeah. Everybody down here understands let me say this. Everybody down here understands how much we give to the state as far as Eddy and Lee County. The two counties, Eddy and Lee County, which is in the heart of KCCC's listenership, contribute an overwhelmingly amount of money to the budget to the state of New Mexico. I mean, an incredibly large amount through oil and gas lease rates. And so down here, we all understand that everybody down here feels a little neglected because of that. Not because we contribute so much funding, it's because the industry that contributes so much funding seems to be under attack so much.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And the state just came out with new data showing that they're going to have another $2.5 billion in what they call new money, which is essentially a government surplus, thanks largely to the oil and gas industry. We have record production, and up until very recently, we had record prices in the Permian Basin, and that has really buoyed New Mexico's government revenue. It's also given the governor, Lujan Grisham, the ability to do a lot of things that she's wanted to do, given the legislature, the ability to enact a lot of progressive left-wing policies, big government stuff that, it's kind of the double-edged sword of energy. It's while we all want to see New Mexico do well and Southeast New Mexico generate these dollars, it gives the politicians in Santa Fe more money than ever to play with, often irresponsibly, when they could and should be doing things to improve the lives of all New Mexicans. And that's really the nub of the issue that we focus on. We certainly at the Rio Grande Foundation defend the oil and gas industry and encourage politicians not to prohibit or limit in unnecessary ways what goes on in Southeast New Mexico that's so beneficial to the rest of the state. But our prime focus is really, how do we use those resources to turn New Mexico into the envy of the nation, or at least get us out of 50th on all these studies and reports that constantly put us down at the very bottom.
I mean, we're now child well-being, I just heard, is now we're 50th yet again, right? And child well-being. But I feel like, Santa Fe's just thrown so much money at it, but they're being incredibly ineffective. Like, do you have any idea why that is? Any opinion? Any thoughts on that?
Oh, absolutely. So let's take a quick step back and then dive into the education discussion. So we are economic and education focused, and the education component of that obviously fits in with the economy as well. But the big picture is New Mexico needs to empower its citizens and not empower government bureaucrats and bureaucracies. We have, as a state, had our economic system upside down for decades. This is not a new problem. It's something that's really inherent in the mindsets of a lot of New Mexicans, especially in the Rio Grande corridor and in the politicians that unfortunately have been in Santa Fe for far too long. So we would like to see, first and foremost, in the economy, reform of the gross receipts tax in a way that stops the penalties on small businesses and really ends the taxation of business inputs. That includes advertising. Advertisers are taxed at 7 and 8% here in New Mexico, where you go to Colorado, you go to Texas, you go to Arizona, there's not a tax on a business input like that. And that's just one of many ways. Attorneys are taxed, medical professionals, doctors are taxed. You have anybody who handles bookkeeping or accounting, those people are all taxed. Not taxed in other states, and it makes our competitors more attractive in those other states. So the gross receipts tax is like, should have done it 20 years ago, need to do it right away. And we've got to remove taxes on entrepreneurship and businesses. There's no reason a state with the amount of money flowing into it like New Mexico, we should even have a personal income tax or a corporate income tax. We should start the process of eliminating those. Then you get into education. We spend more money, as you say. We put more money into the education system, and we continue to get poor results. Wallet Hub recently had a report. We are 28th in spending. We're 51st in results. And we need to radically overhaul our education system by empowering parents and families with those dollars that otherwise flow to bureaucracies to instead be able to choose education options that work for them. I know Southeast New Mexico schools are better than the run-of-the-mill New Mexico schools.
Yes, they are.
So I was in Artesia and had this conversation this summer with the superintendent of Artesia schools. Minority Leader Townsend was in the room, and it was a fascinating conversation because Townsend's with me supporting empowering families, whereas I understand the school leadership is more focused on what can we do, how can we do things better. But unfortunately, Artesia in Southeast New Mexico, schools are not the way schools run across the state. It's much more union driven, much more bureaucracy in the APS, in Santa Fe, in Las Cruces, and they're teaching left-wing things like critical race theory, et cetera. So I think the best solution for all of this is, again, if you want to homeschool your kid, you should get some money from the state to do that. You should get your share of those dollars to go to you. If you want to put your child in a private school or a non-denominational religious school or religious school, whatever it may be, you should get those dollars to use that. And if you want to get special tutoring or special assistance for your child as well, that should be an option. There needs to be more options, more choices, and that's the fundamental way that we see we should reform New Mexico.
Right. So you're saying that the state of New Mexico spends a certain amount of money per year per student, right?
Yep.
Depending on the educational system that they go to. Either way. So if you go to, we'll just say, if you go to Carlsbad Municipal Schools, the state PED, Public Education Department, is going to give that school district a certain amount of money for that student per year, right? So that money is already allocated to that student, right? Mm-hmm. Now, so if that student decides that they would like to go to a religious school or a private school or an academy, or, charter schools are a decent example of that as well, right? Or if they want to be homeschooled by a parent who is educated and a professional and knows how to educate their students, why should that money only go to the school district? That's what you're saying.
That's the gist of it. When you actually talk legislation, and Arizona just adopted this as the policy of the state of Arizona. They passed it through the legislature. It's called an education savings account. West Virginia has done it. A few other states have these policies in place. You're probably not going to take every dime that the state funds the education system and transfer it to the families. It's probably going to be 85 or 90%, maybe, give or take. Again, we're a long way off. We've got to see a governor that supports this kind of policy, which we don't have currently. We've got to see a legislature that also supports these policies. And then you start talking about amounts and how that is accounted for, what mechanisms parents have to show the state that they're actually using that money, not going out and buying a car, those kinds of things. But it is the newest and most powerful education reform that we've seen. And like I said, Arizona, I'm talking like a month ago, 3 weeks ago, just adopted this as the law of the land. They had a system in place like this, education savings accounts, but it was limited to Native American students and special needs kids because of the struggles both of those groups have in the education system. New Mexico doesn't have anything like this. Our education choice is limited to charter schools, and there's many charter schools around the state. You can maybe get to a magnet school, something that kind of goes across the borders of an individual district, but we have very limited educational choice and competition in the state of New Mexico. So we've got to, before we get too specific on what it all means, it's good to talk about the broad parameters of where this discussion could and should go. And I've talked to Mark Ronchetti, the Republican nominee for governor. He has, discussed this policy very favorably in his talking points and where he's going. And Ron DeSantis, too, who I know is just in Carlsbad, and I'm kind of jealous about that one. DeSantis is a rock star. Florida is a state that has been a leader on education reform and education choice for many, many years. DeSantis is just continuing that. Jeb Bush and other governors and legislators in Florida really led the charge, and Florida's got a lot of results under their hats from those programs that they've enacted. And, if you recall, I know it's ancient history at this point, but Susana Martinez, when she came into office, she wanted to make Florida her model for education reform. That's over a decade ago. She brought Hannah Scandera here, and they did the best they could, but the legislature was implacably hostile to any real reforms. It's the unions that dominate in New Mexico's current legislature and governor.
Well, that's what I wanted to mention to you too. So even if we get a governor that's supportive of that in the roundhouse this November, right? Even if we get that, we don't have a legislature that's even probably willing to take a look at that at all or entertain it.
No, you're right, and that's kind of why the discussion. It's a little bit of inside baseball, but I've been at this long enough that I was doing this job when Bill Richardson was governor of the state of New Mexico, and Bill Richardson, for all of his flaws, and we had a lot of disagreements with him, but he did a lot of good, what I would call good things for New Mexico. Cut some taxes. He was a pro-gun Democrat. He was a much more moderate type Democrat than what we have today in Santa Fe. And Richardson was at least willing to talk about school choice and signing legislation at the time. Not education savings accounts; those weren't even around at the time. It was a little more nuanced system that they were considering for school choice back in those days. But as the partisan sides have kind of dug in, Democrats basically have followed the union model, and they aren't willing to budge on choice. I mean, even in 2019, when Lujan Grisham came in, she went after charter schools, which are a pretty milquetoast version of school choice that's available in most states. So the kind of view now is that you got one bite at the apple. You've got to get your ducks in a row politically. You've got to get a legislature that's school choice friendly, that's probably Republican dominated with a Republican governor. So we've got a long way to go in New Mexico before we have these real serious discussions about school choice. But obviously November is it's got to be the starting point. You've got the House up for election, and this governor's race is absolutely critical. And it wouldn't hurt to have a friendly attorney general who's not going to just take up the mantle of the unions when you have a program in place, because that happens. Lawsuits frequently are filed when these programs pass because the unions are defending their turf and their dollars.
Right. Well, I can understand. Whenever you want to make change for the better, which I would agree with you with 100%, you can't, in a way, you can't blame the unions for trying to hold on to what they have. You know what I mean? Like, that's something that they're obviously going to do. And that's why it's even more important for the citizens to vote the right people into office. Now, with the chances of that happening for the Attorney General this November, I don't think are looking good, unfortunately.
I've met with Jeremy Gay. He's the Republican Attorney General candidate. Obviously, he doesn't have the same level of name ID and the platform that Raul Torres has. And Raul Torres, obviously being the district attorney here in Albuquerque, he's tried to move himself a little bit more towards pro-law enforcement and being perceived as a moderate. It'll be interesting. I think the size of the red wave that's coming has kind of varied as we've seen the Democrats in Washington get some accomplishments, at least things that they've passed under their belts, which has goosed their base. The Democrat base, a couple months ago was pretty disillusioned. They hadn't gotten much in the way of policies they wanted out of Biden. And now they've seen some, and then you just have this gas price, for example, going down a little bit. I mean, gas prices remain way higher than they were, but when you've been at where they have been, $5 plus a gallon, being in the low $3 price tag seems a lot better. So I don't know where the voters are going to come down on a lot of these things. I expect that you'll see a lot more advertising and the name ID of the Attorney General candidates. Both of them will be heightened once we hit the Labor Day holiday, because that's when the stretch run hits for all these political races.
Right.
Obviously, governor, that's a marquee race, a lot of money flowing in on both sides of that. But all of these other races really start to take hold once Labor Day hits.
Let's talk about taxes for a second, since you brought up the gross receipts tax. And New Mexico does a very high tax rate, and I think that we get very little in return for how much taxes we do pay. And I always think it's real funny. My wife and I own businesses, and we have to pay the state in order to pay our employees. That we have a payroll tax, right? So we're job creators in a way, and we're working to We're employing individuals. You know what I mean? We're helping them thrive in their livelihood, and I have to pay a tax to pay an employee. You know, and then so if whether anybody agrees with the payroll tax or not, but that's just like, to me, that's just it's contrary to what should be to be happening. When you are literally paying somebody to work for you, I then have to pay the state just to pay somebody.
Yeah, New Mexico does a lot of things that really are the equivalent of shooting itself in the foot. And it's not even about the burden of the taxes that most New Mexicans pay. You know, when we talk about taxes, it's useful to separate the two, because there's taxes that you and I pay, and then there's taxes that the oil and gas industry pays, and they pay a lot of gross receipts tax on the services that go on in drilling in southeast New Mexico, and that gross receipts tax is a tax on them, in addition to taxes like you're talking about. So the difference is, though, that a lot of those oil and gas taxes are borne technically by people who consume the product, gasoline, in other states, or whatever product we're talking about. Could be propane, whatever it is. But it contributes to the size of government. So a lot of reports don't include the oil and gas money in the size of our government or our tax structure because of that reason. And so it makes it look like we're not a high tax state. But when you actually talk about the size of government and you include everything, we are a high tax state and a high government spending state. And yet we have these little piddling taxes, and the gross receipts tax on services is one of them, but all kinds of little regulations and rules, even if they don't generate a cent, they ultimately make New Mexico an unattractive place relative to our neighbors. And, you know, this is a global world, but it's also a regional world. And if you're looking at doing business in the southeastern part of our country, you've got some of the most competitive free market states in the whole union to choose from. Arizona, Utah, even Colorado, which is a blue state, has much superior policies to New Mexico. And of course, Texas doesn't have a personal income tax.
Right.
And they, while people complain about their high sales tax and property taxes, when you actually do the numbers, Texas's burdens are way, way lower. And their burden on productive citizens through the income tax is obviously very, very low, because they have no personal income tax, and New Mexico does. So we have a lot to do. And like I tell people, we're not going to go from 50 to 1 in, you know, even a decade. Right. It's going to take us just a long time to get out of the basements in all of these measuring sticks that we talk about and want to be better in. So I say, let's start with making New Mexico 25th. Let's just get our policy environment out of the doldrums. And there's no better opportunity than we have right now with this oil and gas money. But I fear that the crew up there in Santa Fe right now is not going to do anything to make New Mexico a more business-friendly state. They're going to spend it all.
Right. What's your opinion on the tax rebates? I know that MLG right now has money coming back, claiming that it's extra money from the oil and gas industry. You know, $500 for this married couple, X numbers of dollars for this person. Governor Ronchetti has actually come out and also it said that he would support tax rebates as well. What's your thought on that?
So on one hand, I support, the idea of a tax rebate because it is better than government spending at all. However, I told Mark Ronchetti this personally. I said, look, a rebate, you cannot build a business around a rebate. You can't make that a factor in relocating an enterprise and making rebates a part of your decision-making process on the long-term operation of your business. You have to come in with low upfront taxes, low permanent policies in place that make New Mexico a more attractive state. And unfortunately, the reality is I don't see how Ronchetti gets an annual tax rebate without a permanent fund. That's what Alaska does with their oil and gas money, is they have a permanent fund set up in their constitution, and part of that gets rebated out to citizens of Alaska. They also have no personal income tax and no sales tax in Alaska. So let's be clear, they've got some really great policies in place to begin with, but rebates are a second best policy where we should be permanently lowering, dramatically lowering those tax burdens on New Mexico businesses and citizens, with the idea that someday, and I don't know when, someday we're not going to have this largesse coming out of the oil and gas industry. We're going to have a diversified economy in place that we really can carry more of the water for New Mexico in terms of its industry. And if we don't address those policies, it's going to be all the more difficult to adjust someday when we don't have as much oil and gas money flowing in for whatever reason. It could be everybody's driving electric vehicles. It could be that regulations stop the industry. It could be whatever, but we just need to diversify our economy while the sun is shining and things are looking very, very good for New Mexico with its budget.
It could be a new technology that we don't even know about yet that puts
exactly.
that makes oil and gas industry like not even necessary, right? I mean, like, we really don't know, and to think that we're done innovating doesn't, or we won't continue to innovate or come up with some new solutions doesn't make any sense, because of course we are. So we should be seizing the opportunity now, because now and then we've been doing smart policy decisions and investing that money wisely, instead of just throwing a bunch of money at a one-time problem, hoping that's going to fix something that's a generational problem.
Yeah, and that's really the heart of the issue, is that we need fundamental reform. We need to be more business friendly, and those kinds of things will benefit us throughout our state and our economy. We can't just rely on oil and gas to fund everything. We need to really develop, and that'll benefit all of us over the foreseeable future. I mean, workforce participation rates, just the overall strength of our economy will be improved if we make ourselves more competitive. And that's not to say we need to get rid of oil and gas at all. I want to make that 100% clear. It just means that we can use this amazing amount of revenue to diversify our economy and really make us a more business-friendly state.
Right. Eddy County knows about economic diversification, and they're slowly working towards. We have WIP, we have the potash mines, we've got oil and gas. We're only continuing. Solar can do really well down here as well. Wind energy, for sure. It's windy all the time. If you're from here, you know that, right? But so they understand that, and the city of Carlsbad's understood that forever, especially because they used to be only a potash mine community, and when the potash mine shut down, it was bad news for everybody. Right, so that's the idea behind WIP. That's the idea behind the new Holtec facility in Eddy and Lee County. Right, that's the idea behind oil and gas, and they're only continuing to try to diversify, because even the place that produces the most oil and gas understands that is not the only way to go.
Absolutely, it comes down to culture and having a desire to be pro-business and be attractive, and Southeast New Mexico gets it. Unfortunately, through quirks of when New Mexico became a state, there's a lot of folks I know in Southeast New Mexico. They're like, well, gosh, if we were just part of Texas, we would be so much better off. And they're not wrong on that, because you are always going to be held back or pushed forward by the state that makes the rules and regulations that you have to live under. And I really think this election is the chance to turn New Mexico around and start the process of hopefully making New Mexico a better state to live in. It's going to take everybody in November, though.
All right. Well, so we're almost out of time, Paul. Paul Gessing, Rio Grande Foundation. Thank you, sir. Go ahead and give some information on your website, how people can sign up for all the information that you distribute. Go ahead and give all that good stuff.
Yeah, riograndefoundation.org. Errorsoфenchantment.com is the blog we put out that kind of we report and discuss a lot of the day-to-day information about what's happening in our economy and our education system. So both of those sites you can sign up for. Heck, you can donate. We're a 501c3 nonprofit. You get some tax benefits from that. So we're out there trying to do what's right to improve the state of New Mexico. And I know folks in Southeast New Mexico get it.
Yeah, very much. Well, thank you very much, sir, for being on Community Forum. I'd like to have you on as a regular guest.
Appreciate it, Johnny. Thank you.
All right, thank you. You're listening to Community Forum on KCCC 930 AM, sponsored by Eddy County, honoring God, country, and family, thriving with industry since 1889.